Hi, this is Miss Frenzy, and today is the pre-recorded lesson for Lesson 1 on the rise of the Roman Republic. So first off, what we're going to do is we're going to look at what a republic is. We're going to talk about how the Roman Republic started. There's a vocabulary that we're going to watch. I'm going to try to do it in the video, although last time I did that, it was a fail. So if it doesn't work, I'm just going to link it below the classwork. And then I'm going to introduce and preview today's work. Okay, let's get started. So what is a republic? So a republic is a type of government. We have learned about 4 types of government so far in social studies. Monarchy, that's a king. Tyranny, that's a tyrant or a person who takes control by force. Oligarchy, which is when a group of rich men rule. And then finally, democracy, which is when there's voting. And in a democracy, the voting that you do is for laws themselves. It's called a direct democracy, and it means that each individual citizen is voting for the actual laws themselves. That's what Athens was for a very brief time in the 500s BCE. The Romans never had a democracy, but they had a government that is sort of related to a democracy called a republic. So another name for a republic is representative democracy. It's a big word. And what it means is that you vote, but what you vote for is not the laws themselves. You vote for leaders, and then the leaders make the laws. So in the United States today, what we have is a representative democracy or a republic. Because when we vote, when we go to the ballot box, usually in November, and vote, we don't really usually vote for laws themselves. We vote for leaders to make those laws. Right? We might vote for a senator or a representative. I might vote for the mayor. We vote for the president. So a republic is different from a direct democracy because in a direct democracy, citizens vote on laws. And in a representative democracy, aka a republic, citizens vote on leaders. And that's what Rome was. Okay, let's find out a little bit more about Rome. So if we were in the live Zoom right now, I would ask you, what do you think is a better type of government? Direct democracy like they had in Athens, or a republic, aka representative democracy, also what we have. Even though you're not in the Zoom and you can't just type it into the chat box, I'd love it if you email me, or you could text me at 617-804-1403. The rise of the Roman Republic. So Rome was founded and it grew under a system of monarchy, having a king. And Rome had kings for about 200, 300 years. But they had a string of really, really bad kings in a row. And they decided to get rid of the kings after they had a particularly bad one. His name was Tarquin. There's a picture of him on the slide on a coin that was printed during his time. And Tarquin did a lot of bad stuff. It was very bad king. So let's just say that after they had Tarquin, they had had enough of kings. So the Romans got rid of their kings and decided on this new type of government where they would have votes for leaders, and then the leaders would make the laws. Those people who were going to make the laws were called senators, which we still call them senators today. And there were also 2 consuls. So this word, if you look at the slide, is spelled C-O-N-S-U-L. It's not council, it's consul. And we don't have consuls anymore. But a consul was kind of like the president. The consul's job was to enforce the laws that the senators made. The difference was there were always 2 of them, 2 consuls. And the idea was that if one of them felt too powerful, like a king, then the other one could kind of pull them down. They balanced each other out. And the other difference between a consul and our modern presidency is that consuls were only in charge for 1 year at a time, and then they had to step down. And that prevented anyone from getting too comfortable in a position of authority in Rome. Okay, so this sounds great, but just wait, because it wasn't that great. What was the problem? Well, this system had a really large problem, which was that it was not really fair. The person who thought up this system was named Lucius Junius Brutus. You do not need to know his name later. But he was the person who kind of thought up this system. And he was convinced that normal, everyday people were just not smart enough to run the government. And so what he did was he divided up all the citizens of Rome into two groups. In fairness to Lucius Junius Brutus, he was not the first person who ever did this, but he definitely said, let's keep dividing up Romans into two groups, the patricians and the plebeians. So the word patrician means a wealthy, land-owning person and their family, a rich person. And the word plebeian means everybody else who's a citizen. So any free person in Rome who was not a patrician was a plebeian. And sometimes plebeians were poor, and sometimes they were middle class, and sometimes they were wealthy, but they just weren't from the right family, because once your family was labeled either patrician or plebeian, it was that way forever and you couldn't change it. The only way you could change it is if you were a plebeian woman, you could marry a patrician man. If you were a patrician man who married a plebeian woman, you stayed a patrician, right? You didn't become a plebeian. If you were a patrician woman and you married a plebeian, your kids were plebeians. So there wasn't really much of a way to change. It was a rigid social structure, a little bit like Egypt and their rigid social structure that we learned about in December. Okay, just a quick note, enslaved people, who we're going to talk about on a different day, were not in either category. They weren't patrician or plebeian. They were not even citizens of Rome. Okay, so this title card says, plebs and patricians, who has the power? You're going to notice that oftentimes I call plebeians plebs. It's a nickname for plebeians, but we don't call patricians pats that often. I don't know why. Maybe because they're so fancy, you can't call them by a nickname. I don't know. But so who has the power in Rome? It's patricians. So patrician men, you can tell them pretty easy in pictures because they're always wearing the white toga, sometimes with a purple or red stripe, but they were the only ones who were allowed to wear the toga. Plebeian men were not allowed to wear it because it made the people that they interacted with think they were fancier than they were. Plebeians were not allowed to vote. Patricians were allowed to vote. They could run for senator and they could be the consul. Their women, the women who were married to patricians or were their daughters, they didn't have any rights, but they were wealthy and they had a lot of privileges. Patricians were about 5% of the Roman population. So out of every 20 people, one of them was a patrician. Plebs were 95% of the people. So if you had a room of 20 people, 19 of them would be plebs. Plebeian men were not permitted to wear the white toga. And whether they were wealthy or poor or middle class, they were not allowed to vote or run for senator or consul. And the women didn't have any rights at all. Okay. Let's go on to the next slide. I keep clicking the wrong place on my screen. Okay, so in the chat box, if you were in my live Zoom, I would be asking you, what do you think about this system? Are the rich, well-educated, and powerful in a better position to know how to run things than the poor? And today, in our own society, we struggle with this because in the United States, each citizen has one vote, no matter how wealthy they are or no matter how educated they are. But we all know that some people have more influence on how things happen than other people. Rich business people have more of a say in how things go. Even though they just have one vote in the ballot box, there's other ways to influence stuff. And the other part of it is true too, which is if you don't know anything at all about an issue, if you are ignorant, like willfully ignorant on purpose, you still get a vote. If the issue doesn't affect you at all, like you could care less whether this thing happens or not, you still get a vote. But in our society, the idea is one citizen, one vote, right? So what do you think? Do you think that one citizen, one vote is the best way to do it? Or do you think that the well-educated or the powerful are in a better position to say like what's right, what's wrong? This is up to you. It's just an opinion. You can always email me or text me, 617-804-1403. So is that the end of the bad stuff? No, there's more. So the patricians and the plebeians, there's this divide of fairness, but also there's other things going on that are super unfair. The patricians are the ones who wrote the laws. They're the senators who make the laws, but they're not required to actually write them down anywhere. So a lot of times the plebeians didn't know what the laws were. They would often get arrested for breaking a rule or fined money for laws that they didn't even know existed. There was one set of laws for patricians and another for plebeians, and the penalties for plebeians breaking the law were a lot harsher than for the patricians. The patricians got to decide when and where Rome would get into war, and Rome was always getting into wars. But the plebeians were the ones who got drafted into the army and had to fight. And then finally, the patricians decided what the taxes would be. And often the taxes were different for patricians than they were for plebs. But the plebs didn't get any say on how the money was spent. So they'd be making money, working hard, paying their money to the government, and getting no say in how the money got spent. So not fair. So if you were a pleb, which of these things would probably bug you the most? For me personally, I would not be happy to be drafted into battle for a war that I had not agreed to fight. That's just me. This slide says, handle your business, Rome. And the reason it says that is because as Rome conquered more and more land, always in the background, there was this tension between patricians and plebeians. The name of this struggle, of this class struggle between the rich and the poor in Rome, is called the conflict of the orders. It's kind of a fancy name, but conflict just means fight. And the orders just means the two different classes. So conflict of the orders means the fight between the plebs and the patricians. Over time, this fight ate away at the strength of Rome because it was always in the background percolating up. No matter how good things were going otherwise, the plebs were always unhappy and they were always resisting authority. They wrecked public buildings, they vandalized temples, they wrecked events and marketplaces, and they even had a strike, which means they stopped working and they left the city. They went and camped out in the countryside outside the city, and then the patricians had to do their own laundry and cook their own meals, and the city stopped until the patricians said, okay, here are some rights, will this quiet you down? Right. This fight for power lasted hundreds of years. And over time, the plebs did get some stuff. They got the right to have the laws written down. They got the right to vote. They got the right to become senators and consuls. And they even got the right to have their own lawmaking council called the assembly that would make the laws that applied to plebs. Because you know the laws were different for plebs than patricians. And now they were going to make their own laws for themselves. And they even got full equality to the letter of the law. But they never really got real equality because the difference between plebs and patrician families was never eliminated or abolished. Hundreds of years after being a patrician was the same as being a pleb under the law, people still knew who was who, and patricians didn't want to marry plebs. Patricians didn't want to be friends with plebs. The difference was never abolished, and there was always privilege that went with being a patrician, hundreds of years after there stopped being a difference in the law. And so patricians still excluded plebs whenever they could do it legally, and sometimes illegally. So the fight for equality was never really over, even when Rome ended. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to try to watch a vocabulary called Rise of the Republic. It gives a good version of the problems facing the plebeians. Last time I tried to play a vocabulary on my pre-recorded video, it was a total fail. So we're going to see if this goes any better. I'm full of suspense. Okay, so I'm logged in. You can see it says my first name up there. So that's the first step. And let's see if it'll go ahead and play.
After all the kings were gone, before Rome got the empire wrong, the Roman Republic was a democracy and changed governments for eternity. Welcome to Rome, my big city called home, 509 BCE. Last king's been overthrown. A tussle is brewing between two classes of citizens, the plebeians and the patricians. What's it all about? This is the beginning of the Roman Republic, and always the politics about to be out. Plebeians, who are the common people, working class, are tired how the wealthy patricians rule the land. I'm a woman in a slave I don't have a say. I'm not a citizen, but I watch the play-by-play. Plebeians populate most of Rome, but patricians seem to control the zone. And now plebeians get punished under laws they don't understand, or even worse, don't know existed. Sick and tired of not having input, plebeians recognize collective power, and they're straight up resistant. Withholding their labor, military service, threatened secession, and altogether left Rome. Yes, all plebeians left Rome. Without any workers, the city lost its soul. 494 BCE showed that plebeian action forced the Roman government to grow. Now they added new political offices and voting assemblies for the plebeians. And plebeians have a say on how the politics go. 451 BCE, the 12 tables with the Roman law were posted up in the forums. Now all the people get to see. Crazy where a town dude can lead. Amazing when the people see the power in the people. Now the plebeians shift the Roman government. Let us see how this continues to play out in society. After all the kings were gone, before Rome got the empire wrong, the Roman Republic was a democracy and changed governments for eternity. The Roman Republic's democratic model paved the way for modern democracy. The government has three branches like the tree: the Senate, Council, and voting assemblies. Consuls are leaders in military and politics, kind of like presidents, but they serve 1-year terms. There are 2 of them, and each can veto another to make sure neither can have too much power. Too much power. The Senate is made up of patricians. They advise consuls and make financial decisions. Consuls almost always favor the patricians. It seems patricians' wealth and social status sway their decisions. Assemblies are made up of representatives elected by patrician and plebeian groups. The reps cast votes on their behalf and majority rules. But I've noticed how the groups are organized. Patricians got more pull when electing consuls. It's like patricians and the consuls have a clique and leave plebeians out, which is not cool. So at the end of the day, patricians still got more say than the plebeians of what the government decides to do. Yes, plebeians got their own assemblies and their power increased like an inch or two. Rome's expanding, seizing land they want. Conquered men get to be citizens, but the democracy isn't fair enough. The patricians are still favored over plebeians, so the inequality cannot be hushed. Civil war roars and the republic turns to dust. But can you see how the Roman Republic's democratic model shaped your democracy? Hey.
Okay. Well, at least it worked that time. That's good. Okay. So, what is the work today? So, let's go ahead back and this doesn't look how I want it to look. Okay. So I actually really like that vocabulary because I think it gives a good idea of how the problem with the plebs and the patricians, how it ruined everything for Rome. It was always in the background and it led to civil war, which we're going to talk about soon. Okay, so let's look at today's work. I'm going to preview that really quick for you guys. I'm sorry, these forms are not looking exactly like I expect them to. So the assignment's in my classroom, and there is a reading selection about patricians and another reading selection about the division of power. And there's just like a little comprehension question for each one. I think that's it for today. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop the recording. If you have any questions or problems with this work, feel free to email me at lrenzi@bostonpublicschools.org, or you can always text me at 617-804-1403. Miss Renzi, I don't understand the work for Monday or Tuesday. I guess it would actually be Tuesday or Wednesday because of Labor Day. Okay, let's go ahead and stop the recording.